Hey everybody, good morning. This is a quick talk about leadership, teamwork, and the creative process. What we're going to cover in this talk is the important traits of leadership on a creative team, the responsibilities of those people on a creative team to have good teamwork, good team play, processes that support this kind of work, and then I'm going to go through some tips for a long career. Quick note about myself, I've been in video games since the year 2000 and a producer since 2007. I started as a Scrum Master in 2008 and am now a Senior Scrum Master and Agile Coach. And of course, I've been a cartoonist since about forever. So this isn't really a controversial stance to take, but game making takes creativity, right? And it's not just creativity of yourself, it's creativity on the entire team, getting a team of people to work in a creative way. Now, for game making, which is my experience, it's obvious when you look at artists and designers, they're creative people, but I would argue that the engineers that I've worked with in the past are some of the most creative people I've met as well. And they are creatively problem solving just using code. My thesis here is that leadership needs to understand creativity and be creative at some level to allow for creativity on the team. And that leadership, I'm talking about producers, managers, company leaders, all those things. Understanding what creativity is at that level enables you to empower your teams to be their most creative. So let's define creativity. The best definition I've ever found of creativity is this intersection between three key elements. The first key element is expertise, and that is, of course, the skills in which you use the tools of your craft. When you're on a creative team and you're an expert with your tools, it's important to reach out to your teammates, especially those not in your area of study, to get them at least a little bit informed of the way that you do your work so that feedback can be informed and so that their suggestions live in the realm of possible. As a teammate with expertise, don't think your expertise means you can't learn something new, even from somebody not in your field. Your expertise is not to the exclusion of learning something new. The second aspect is creative thinking skills. It's a little more vague, I'll walk through. Creative thinking skills is that comfort you have with taking a risk, solving problems, the ability to work through dry spells, to not get frustrated to the point of quitting, but to persevere through setbacks. A lot of the research talks about how the loss of creativity from childhood to adulthood can be linked to the way that you're externally stimulated. So if you're praised for your effort or you're praised for your results, if you're praised for your results and then sometimes you don't get the results you're looking for, you start to think of, well, since I'm not getting praised, this creative process isn't working for me. If you're praised for your effort, you've done a good job, just trying hard is worth the effort, then you're more likely to persevere through creative stumbling blocks. As you're on a creative team, one thing to do is to be available to your teammates when they're dealing with dry spells or they're dealing through setbacks or writer's blocks. If you're a manager of a creative team, build your schedules or build your process such that you allow for some level of setbacks. If the team can't have any kind of setbacks, they're going to stop taking creative risks and then you've stopped innovating. This is all supported by the concept of psychological safety, that ability to be yourself at work, to take risks without fear of reprisal or ridicule. Once this is eroded, innovation and creativity clearly stops. So I'll reach out and say, as a manager, you want to praise the hard work, note the frustration when the results aren't the desired results, and then be sure to praise both the results and the effort that people put into things. The third aspect is motivation. With creative teams, you're going to find that creative people are generally internally motivated at a pretty high level. If they're working in a creative field, they've got this already internally. What I'm going to talk about in this presentation is extrinsic motivation. It's hard to master that ability to motivate someone from the outside as a lead. And I say that because it's easy to, without intentionally doing so, damage someone's internal motivation with the way that a lead approaches an issue. So we'll talk about the things to do correctly to motivate from the outside, and of course some stumbling blocks that is talked about in the research. Before we go into motivation, let's talk about these key aspects of being a leader on a creative team. And when I'm talking about leader, I'm not necessarily referring only to the person who's been labeled as the leader. Person with the role of leader on the team, creative director, those kinds of things. That's a positional role to have a title and then use that title as a reason for you being listened to. It happens many places, and sometimes it's an earned position, sometimes it's less earned. But I also want to reach out to those people who are acting as a lead, what we call a permissional leader. And that is the team themselves have said, we like this person, they're skilled at their job, or they have a good demeanor, they've got right charisma. People follow permissional leaders as much or even sometimes more so than a positional leader. So you could find yourself in a leadership role without having a title at all. Just people are attracted to you and your leadership style. So if you find yourself in either of those roles, permissional or positional leader, keep these traits in mind. It is only further served to help you when you're on a creative team. Here's a list, and I'm going to go through each of them individually, but we're talking about confidence, curiosity, reliability, and self-awareness. This list is not exhaustive. I'm sure there are other traits that people could list. I would say that these 4 came up in the literature quite a bit as I was doing my research. Let's talk about confidence. This is the ability to broadcast a calmness, that the storm around us is just temporary, that ultimately there's optimism for the future. If there's proper charting, we can make it through. It's not just a head down and charge forward, but I recognize what's going on around me, and I still think, because of all my experience, we're going to make it through okay. A second piece about this is being secure in your own vulnerabilities, and that is talking about yourself and recognizing where you have limitations, talking openly about your vulnerabilities. I talk about the idea that I geek out of comic books, right? Because I do. And I don't think that takes anything away from me, even though people can say comic books, that seems like it's for kids. Thank goodness for the MCU that's kind of putting that all behind us. The third piece is the ability to say and hear, I don't know. As a lead, if you're not able to hear someone on your team tell you, I don't know, and you broadcast this idea that, what do you mean you don't know? You're supposed to know the answers to everything immediately. Well, nobody really does. And by giving off that sense, you're actually asking your team to make things up before they have the proper amount of information. You're basically asking them to lie to you. And you don't really want that. You want reliable information. So be able to hear, I don't know. And be able to say also at the same time, I don't know the answers to that. You know what? We have to get more information before we can decide. And this is my action plan for getting that more information so we can move forward. So it's being able to say, I don't know, or hear, I don't know, and then talk about your action plan for moving forward. That takes a great deal of confidence and oftentimes is left behind when people jump into leadership roles. The second aspect is curiosity. Seeking out new information to challenges. Like, what are some possible ways we could approach this? Engaging the team for their input and letting their input inform the decision-making process. That opens up, again, the communication channels. If you appear curious, people are going to be more forthcoming with their challenges because they know that you're on their team for solving those problems. You want to express an interest in other points of view. It's oftentimes said that leaders talk last in meetings, that they let everybody else have their piece and truly listen to that information before starting to inform the team your preferred path. Oftentimes, if a leader speaks first in a meeting, depending on the makeup of your team, the room becomes an echo chamber where they're just repeating back to you what you've said to them. The way to make sure that that does not happen is let everybody else speak first. And allow for some experimentation within risk boundaries. So you would say something like, how do we know if that will work? Or how much time will that take? And instead of saying, oh, that will never work, or we don't have time for that. You may truly feel like you don't have time for it, but first ask, how much time would that take? You might be surprised by the answer. That might only take a couple of hours to find out. We've got a couple of hours, let's give that a try. But you are trying to find out the information first before you make a snap decision. The third aspect is reliability, and there's a couple different depths to reliability. It of course means getting done what you signed up to do, but there's a second aspect and third aspect. You want to keep your communication lines open at all times. At this level, what I'm talking about is if someone's reaching out to you and they would like some information, maybe they're reaching out to you through an instant chat message, and you don't have the answer immediately, it is very important to reach back out to them to say, I need to get back to you, give me 2 hours, or I need to get back to you and set the amount of time that you'd like to have before returning fire. It is no good to receive a message and ignore it until you have the answer, especially if it's going to take quite a bit of time. People feel like you're not around for them. So reach back out immediately, even if it's just to say, I need some more time. There's a third depth to reliability, and in this I'm talking about an emotional reliability. So that is a reliable reaction to information and people. You don't want to have two wildly different emotional reactions to the same level of information. If on day one, I come in and I tell you a level of information, a challenge that we're having, and you respond with, okay, well that seems difficult, but we can probably survive it. But day 4, I come in with the same level of information, and your response is a wild emotional swing. Oh my goodness, this is going to kill us. Why did you wait so long to tell me? This is horrible for our project, yada, yada. I feel like you're not emotionally reliable, so the communication line breaks down. I'm not sure what kind of day you're having, so I'm a little bit concerned about coming to you with information because I'm not sure which one of you I'm going to get. So having an emotional reliability is important. We talk about baseline, swing, and recovery when we talk about this. Baseline being your basic optimist, pessimist, and as a lead, you want to, again, broadcast an optimist level as much as possible. Your swing is how far off of your baseline you come. So information sends you wildly up and down, not as good as when you can keep close to your baseline. You can swing. Obviously, we're creative people, and we're going to have an emotional reaction to things. We want it to be a relatively stable emotional swing. And then your recovery is how long it takes for you to get back to your baseline. And admittedly, sometimes I might have unintentionally insulted somebody when I certainly didn't mean to. For myself, I know that I have a hard time recovering from that. So again, I'm really cautious about it, or I talk to myself about my recovery. I've got to put that behind me. But there's other information I can get where I can have an emotional reaction and then recover pretty quickly. So you do want to recognize your baseline, your swing, and your recovery. And the fourth aspect is self-awareness. Of course, this means understanding what your role is and how well suited you are for that role, knowing where you're facing a challenge and when you've reached your limitations, and then knowing how to recruit experts and delegate to your team. And of course, recognizing which of these four traits is the one that needs the most attention on any given day or at any given phase of your career. With that understanding of the four important traits of creative leaders, let's talk about motivating your creative teams. As we said before, internal motivation is oftentimes there already with your team, and what we're really trying to do is make sure that we're not stomping on their internal motivation. A quick note about financial rewards as an external motivator. There's a great deal of caution in the literature about this. I'll give you some reasoning why. What research has found is that a financial reward has a limited boosting effect to motivation, but then it dies pretty rapidly. What happens is you can offer a financial reward for achieving more, but people will work up to the value of that they perceive is their work matching to that financial reward. Basically, I'll give you $200 if you can finish this quickly. Well, $200 for me, finishing quickly means 4 more hours, when I really meant, can you finish it in the next hour for $200? It also has the added risk of insulting somebody who is feeling like, listen, I'm not in this game for a financial reward at all. I'm about doing this for my art. Or if you lowball somebody not knowing where their level is, if you say, listen, if you just stay late this weekend, we'll give you extra $25. Well, $25, my weekend is worth way more than $25. Again, that can come across as an insult. So I offer caution when you talk about financial rewards. Most of the literature says it's dangerous to do that. But let's talk about the kinds of things that do motivate creative people. First is a sense of challenge. And that is providing somebody with work that is at their peak performance or just past their peak performance. Too little challenge is boring and can cause disengagement. Listen, I'm not a pawn, I'm a chess player. I want to be in there and working hard. At the same time, something that's too challenging or recognized as impossible, it calls into question your ability to lead. How can they possibly ask for that in 2 days? They're nuts. They don't understand the scope of these things. So you want to provide a challenge at the right level. The second piece is freedom. Now, we talk about freedom. Of course, you have to set boundaries for the freedom for the team. But you want to broadcast those boundaries, right? All I'm asking you to do is accomplish this. However you accomplish it is on you, but these are your parameters or these are your acceptance criteria. I'm not going to tell you how to do it step by step. You have the freedom to decide how to do that step by step. I'm just asking you to reach this goal. What we're saying here is setting a goal without specific steps, allowing for some risk and accepting some setbacks. The reward of high innovation is certainly worth a few setbacks. Third piece is to provide the proper amount of resources. Again, this is providing within boundaries what resources you can afford to do the work, but you don't want to ask your team to dig a tunnel with a spoon unless they have the Shawshank time on their hands. Fourth aspect that's not oftentimes thought about is the group dynamic. You want to recognize the team morale and keep an eye on it, and keep an eye on team interplay, and intervene if that dynamic becomes destructive or has a destructive level of friction. You want to make sure that the group is working well together. And if you put a creative person into a work group where there's a lot of friction between themselves and other people, you're going to affect their motivation in a bad way. We oftentimes talk about having a group diffuser, and that is somebody within each group who has the ability to lift the energy of the group, to diffuse tension when necessary, to someone the team kind of relies on as someone who can relax everybody when the team needs relaxation. The fifth aspect is encouragement, and this is encouragement from supervisors. We want to be sincere with our praise, not fluff, and certainly not an insult sandwich. If you're not familiar with the insult sandwich, that is, hey, I really like how you did this. Everything is really late, by the way, but I really did like how it came out. That insult sandwich is really demotivating, so leave that middle part out or have a separate conversation about the things that are challenging. I have a separate talk about feedback and critique that I'll be giving further on down, but I would say that encouragement ought to be considered as a very important part for motivating creative people. They want to hear praise from their management, and again, keeping it balanced between praising their results and praising their effort. And the last piece is studio support or company support. This is universal, probably well beyond creatives, but people who work for you want to feel like the studio has their back. And this means things like benefits, paid time off, bereavement, just being treated like a human being. If they don't feel that way, it's going to be very hard to put creative energy into their work. So that's approaching things as a team lead. Let's talk a little bit about you as a team member on a creative team. On video game teams, we have a lot of disciplines. We've got programmers, artists, designers, production people, audio people, a QA team. That's not even the end of it. There's marketing, license holders, HR, the client, if you're working for a client project. There's a fair amount of different disciplines, and then a fair amount of mindsets that go with each of those disciplines. So there's a wide variety of backgrounds and disciplines involved in each project. Each of those areas have their own strengths, they have their own goals, and they have their own interests. No department ought to be marginalized or jettisoned. It's really equal to being a stool, where if you take out one of these legs, take out production, take out audio, you're not going to have a good project. So how do you start and maintain good cohesion when you've got so many different areas of study, so many different areas of interest, all trying to work towards the same goal? Here are some tips to make that happen. The first is to delineate, diagram, and post your team structure. Make sure that it's not vague at all. I talk a lot about managing expectations, and one way to do that is to broadcast as much as possible all the information that the team might need, and that includes a team structure. There's a concept called collaborative pairing, and that is when you have two people from either the same or different disciplines who are overlapping in a certain area, it can be really helpful to diagram out that relationship. Basically, a Venn diagram talking about these are your responsibilities, these are my responsibilities, and we have these shared goals. An example might be a lead animator and a designer in a fighting game. The designer might ask for the hits to happen at a certain timing, and the animator wants to make sure that the hits have the right visual look, but both of them have the shared goal of having the experience feel integrated for a player. If you have not done the exercise of collaborative pairing, I'll have another presentation about this at some point in the future. The second piece is to communicate, building a reliable, scheduled communication channels. This is things like talking every day as a group, taking important notes on decisions and making those notes available to everybody on the team, showing your schedule, right? Showing your progress as a team to everybody on the team, making that available and having them look at that with you so that you can answer any questions while they're looking at it. Communication is so key. And that's why I talk about making sure that you don't do anything that makes people slow down their communication. Third piece is collaboration. That is, when you reach a point or when you see people on your team reaching a point where they can't come to a decision because they're at loggerheads, this simple exercise might help. What you would do if you're in the situation is offer up what it would take for the other side to convince you that they are correct. I hear what you're saying. If I saw it do this, I'd probably agree with you. And then ask them to do the same thing back for you. What would it take for you to be convinced of what I'm saying? Then once you have those 2 points out in the open, you can talk about which one's the easiest one to test, or the fastest to test, one that's going to cause the least amount of overwork, and then see if once you've seen it either succeed or fail moving forward at that point. The next piece is to evaluate. Revisit your processes regularly. You want to talk about the things that are working well and what needs to be improved, and then possible solutions for those improvements. And lastly, celebrate. We say sitting on the win, but what we're really saying here is when things are working out really well, cheer as a team, cheer and celebrate with the team. If you're familiar with In Excess, now's the time for the sax solo. I have a video on the channel called Agile and Scrum in 30 Minutes. Please take a look at that video if you haven't already. It's a good explanation of how the processes, the nuts and bolts of Agile and Scrum work on a video game team. But I want to touch about it really quick in this video. The reason I advocate for an Agile mindset and Scrum processes is because it addresses those 5 pieces of good team play. With Scrum ceremonies, we're delineating each person's role by having roles like the product owner and the Scrum master and discipline leads. We communicate through standard ceremonies like the stand-up meetings and the Scrum boards and the burn downs. All those things are broadcast out to the entire team. We're not trying to hide information from them at all. We collaborate during the story estimation meetings, the project owner and lead meetings. Again, see that video to understand what I mean entirely, but collaboration is an important piece of the Scrum processes. We evaluate. We have retrospectives every sprint, and when you watch that video, you'll hear me say a number of times, retrospectives in my mind are the most important piece to the entire process. Not that it stands by itself, but it is an important piece. And celebrate, and we do that with demo days in the Scrum process at the end of every sprint. I did say I would offer up some career advice, and I did this when I gave this talk at the university recently. So here are a few important pieces to remember if you're getting into the video game field, or if you're in a creative industry entirely, or if you're working with creative teams in your career. The first piece is learn good team skills now. And you may have good team skills already, but there's always more to learn. And there are places to go out and find information. The internet is a wonderful place to go out and seek out information. If you're watching this video, I'm assuming you're doing that already. Organize your communication. This is things like learning how to use your email and your chat system, your text messages, creating task lists for yourself, naming conventions, folder structures, leaving good comments in your code. All those important pieces. Organize your communication really, really well. Learn those skills. Because again, as you're working on teams, really a key aspect of working on a creative team is your ability to communicate with other people on your team, especially because you're striving to reach the same goal as a group. Keep a helpful links document. And I do this right now. I use the cloud to do it. But whenever I find a good article or see a good video, I make sure that I keep that link in a document so I can refer back to it later. I would say if TED Talks and GDC Talks are what you go for information, videos, those kinds of things, watch actively. Take notes in your helpful links document on those videos so you can recall the notes later on and not have to watch the video all over again. One trick that I'll give you as well, if someone mentions a book that they feel is very important to your career or helpful for you to read, oftentimes these authors will go out and give a TED Talk, and you can get a quick read of that book just by listening to their talk. It doesn't substitute reading the entire book, but it can give you good information and a quick download to get you moving along, probably piquing your interest into reading the full book at a later date. And I also talk to creative people about consistently pulling for their demo reel. Be sure that on a regular basis, you're pulling out some information. Now, you have to check with your studio because there are some studio rules. Some studios are very stringent about it. Other studios are very more lax about it. But you want to ask at what point or what's the process for holding on to information for your demo reel. But do this on a regular basis. I would say monthly. It also helps when you're doing your in-studio evaluations to be able to have a list of all the pieces that you've worked on so you can recall at the end of the year, these are all the things that I worked on, and help your manager understand the benefits of having you at that studio. There's actually a last piece too. I would say whenever you're in a conversation with anybody and walking away, before you walk away, say thank you. It helps to set you as a person who is collaborative and works well with others. And I would say thank you for listening to this talk. Again, my name is Jeff Outlaw. You can always reach me at outlawRsons@gmail.com. If you want to reach out about this video, please put in the subject line, this is regarding the leadership talk. And I'll be putting out more videos in the coming weeks. Please like, share, and subscribe, or post this on your LinkedIn or anything like that. Anything you can do to help me promote this video series is appreciated. Cheers.